Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. We are excited today. We have a wonderful guest joining us, Kori Estrada, calling in from New York. So, Kori, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our discussion.
So am I. I'm looking forward to, just understanding what your journey's been about and to talk about the product that you've developed, which I have personally tried and love. And so excited to talk to the audience about that as well. But before we go there, audience, I want to thank you for joining us. We know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to, and we're grateful that you chime in to the Women in Leadership Talk, where we get to showcase amazing individuals doing incredible work around the world. And, our hopes is you'll take something away from this and go, wow, I didn't know that, or it's a great way for you to introduce something into your life. So thanks again for joining us. And let me give you a little feedback about Kori so you know why she's joined us today and why we're having this conversation. Kori is the co-founder of Risewell, and she's disrupting the oral care industry with an all-natural, sustainable brand that prioritizes safe ingredients and transparency. And definitely you can tell the difference when you try her products. And this is driven by her personal experiences where she had celiac disease, or has, I'm assuming you still have that, Kori, and has gone through the IVF process. So Kori's dedication to overall health and wellness led her, along with her former partner, John Estrada, and her brother, Derek Gatta, to create dentist formulated products that are free from harmful chemicals like fluoride, sulfates, and synthetic additives. Collaborating with leading doctors and dentists, she's discovered the power of help me out here,
Hydroxyapatite.
hydroxyapatite. Thank you, Kori. It's a mouthful. While she was doing research in Japan. And so finding this ingredient for Risewell's best-selling toothpaste has led her to a full line of oral care health products. And she has a background in finance and an unwavering commitment to innovation. Kori envisions a future where Risewell transforms the industry and inspires holistic well-being. So, Kori, a fantastic background that you have, and just really excited to learn from you today. More about your journey, because celiac disease is so widespread. I mean, so many people now have it, and so many women, unfortunately, are having to go through the IVF process. Both seem to be really forefront in some of the challenges that women are facing. So I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about your own journey and then how that has led to translated into oral care.
Yeah, so it's an interesting journey and not one that, like many others, I wouldn't have expected having co-founded a toothpaste company, but life always takes you on unexpected turns. So I went to Columbia, New York City, which is sort of how I ended up here in the world of finance. And shortly after starting my full-time job in investment banking, right in the middle of the financial crisis of 2008, I was working a tremendous amount, late hours, super stressed all the time. And I started having a lot of stomach issues, which it took sort of at the time. I mean, this celiac disease wasn't something that there was, widely, gastroenterologists were aware of it, but it was kind of this fringe, seemingly sort of rare condition that some people suffered from. So it actually took me a good 2 or 3 years and many doctors to figure out that that was one of the issues that I was having. But I've ended up finding a great integrative doctor in New York City who worked with me. And I remember he did a blood test, and I'm half Italian, and he told me that I should not eat gluten for a few days. And the idea of that just sounded impossible, given my love of bread and pasta and all those wonderful things. And he said, look, just give it a try for a few days and see how you feel. And a few days later, I was literally a different person. My symptoms had gone away really overnight. I wasn't as tired and fatigued as I was before. And I had a whole host of other issues that really just disappeared. And so that was really the pivotal moment for me, where I understood, before that, I was seemingly invincible, and I could eat whatever I wanted and do whatever I wanted and work so many hours and sleep very little. with no consequences. And this was the first time that I really understood the connection between sort of health and just overall well-being and what I was eating and putting into my body. And so that took me on like stage one, which was really the food journey in my early to mid 20s. And after that point, I discovered, I guess, sort of my later 20s that I had something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I was on birth control pills for many years. And so it masked me having that. And when I was 18, not having had a period at that point, my doctors just put me on birth control pills and so said, yeah, just this happens sometimes. You're athletic, and occasionally that this is just sort of a thing that can happen to women. And but lo and behold, sort of 10 years later, discovered that I actually had sort of an underlying endocrine issue that ultimately is sort of the simple way of describing it is insulin resistance. And so that was kind of stage two of the health journey. Me and my partner at the time, John, we were starting to think about having kids, and it became increasingly clear that I would have to go through the IVF process. And this is in sort of my early 30s. And as probably many women know, it's both expensive and also not that fun to go through of a process. And we wanted to make sure that we were doing everything to make it a success. We sat down with our doctor at the time, and he said, besides sort of following our medicine protocol and eating the right foods, you want to make sure that you're also using the right products. And he described some of the things to avoid and some of the things we should be using. And I think both of us went home that night and we turned our bathroom upside down and realized that most of the everyday products that we were putting on our bodies, the toothpaste we were using, were not great. We had literally kind of researched each and every ingredient on the back of the tubes and bottles that we had. And we were able to replace most of the products in our bathrooms with good alternatives. The one thing we really struggled with were our oral care products, which sounds strange because even at the time, this was 7 years ago, there were a decent amount of natural products on the market. The challenge, as we learned from my brother, who's a dentist, is that most natural toothpaste, they take out the fluoride and they don't replace it with anything that actually is effective. And so, as my brother described it, you're essentially using flavored paste. So his point was like, might as well brush with water because it's just as effective as natural toothpaste. And that was really the light bulb moment for us where we said, there has to be a better way, a way that we can create a product that is both super effective, but also safe enough as food because it's going in your body, it's being absorbed by your gums 2 times a day. Even if you're spitting out your toothpaste, you are absorbing a lot of it every single day. So we wanted to think of the ingredients in our tube as food. So if it wasn't something that we could consume as food, it wasn't going into our toothpaste. So that was really the question that we were trying to seek an answer to, is can we come up with something that is really revolutionizing what's on the market today, something dentists can get behind, but also is really natural.
Wow. I mean, okay, so you said a number of things there I want to tap into. So just even in the beginning, so the celiac, so that led you to clues of, different foods even. I mean, gluten is in everything basically. And very hard, especially in the US and maybe not as much now, but to find foods that are gluten-free. I remember years ago, my daughter, they thought she had celiac disease. And so they had same thing, get off all gluten, don't have anything. And we struggled really to find products that didn't have any gluten. And so just from a curiosity perspective, like, did the gluten have anything to do with your IVF?
It's hard. It's hard to tell. And I think honestly, I wouldn't be able to know definitively. But I think that there's, what I've learned sort of since I've actually no longer have PCOS. And that's sort of it took kind of many years. I was on metformin for a bunch of years, which is something that they give to women with PCOS. And then I said, let me try going off of this and see if I can figure this out on my own. And through actually mostly eating a keto diet, was able to finally sort of naturally get a period on my own, which was like a big accomplishment for me.
Wow.
And my latest sort of going to a doctor a year or two ago, she's like, you have no more signs of having PCOS, which is really cool to realize that actually food can heal you in ways that medicine can't. I mean, medicine is sort of that Band-Aid that goes on top, but Certainly I have to think there is some kind of connection. I mean, the approach that I've taken to food, it's funny, when I first found out that I couldn't have gluten, I did sort of, as you're describing, like try to find all of these gluten-free replacements to everything that I had been eating. And now sort of fast forward to 10 plus years later, and my approach is like anything whole foods. Like I eat unlimited vegetables, fruit, meats, dairy products, things that just aren't processed. And I don't even eat any of the gluten-free replacements, because we can really, I mean, the most nutritious way are like kind of food as it was intended in its whole form. And there's plenty of yummy things in that category that it's easy to go to a restaurant and find a great piece of fish and vegetables and salads and all of those great things. And so that's kind of been the diet of choice more recently. But yeah, it is. It's a transition that takes, I think most people kind of evolve in a similar fashion, where it's like you go to the store and you're like, how can I find that good gluten-free pasta? And then you recognize that actually, like, there's all these great other foods that maybe I wasn't sort of emphasizing enough, that can be like super nutritious and a medicine in a way that I didn't think of before, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. And that's kind of where my head was going. Like food is medicine, right? Like
Yeah.
in our bodies, oftentimes it will tell us, like, I know for myself, like I can't eat any kind of red meat unless it's grass fed. And I don't know why, but there's something in it that just I have a reaction to every single time I eat it. And so when you go to restaurants, like I just try to stay away from the meats, and you have other things, right? But yeah, it's interesting how it all ties together. And so that was sort of your, stage one, figuring out the food and how to nourish your body. And then when you started going through this IVF process, um, finding out that different products, so oral is a big one, yes, but then you talked about there's other chemicals that are in things that are harmful to us. And I'm only asking this because so many young women that listen to our show have or are going through the IVF process. And I think it's, to highlight what are some of those things, like we're going to talk about the dental specifically here in just a second, but what are some of the other things that you found, that you were surprised you shouldn't be taking into your body or on your body?
Well, the big one for me at the time specifically, I think, were things that were endocrine disruptors. So anything that could disrupt your hormones, especially somebody with not I have some friends that have had sort of the most regular hormones that you could possibly imagine, and haven't struggled sort of in the ways that I have. And so everyone is different. For me, I knew that sort of getting my hormones balanced has taken me many, many, many years, and lots of iterations of different diets and trying different things. And I think the reason why doctors are hesitant to prescribe diets as a prescription for health problems is that it took me 2 to 3 years of eating in a certain way to realize it was working for me. It wasn't something that happened overnight. I had to have the patience to say, I'm going to stick with this. I feel good, and hopefully my hormones will translate into this sort of working for me, which it eventually did. So I think the endocrine disruptors are really a big one, especially for women, because I think the balance of hormones is really just a delicate process that one doesn't want to mess with. And that's I think it's easy to get caught up in all of the world of like consumerization right now, where they're trying to sell you organic mattresses and carpets and pans and skincare products and oral care products. And ultimately, to me, like, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by that. The priority is, as we've discussed, number one, food. And then honestly, right below that, oral care, because it's something that's going in your body as well. You're not literally swallowing the toothpaste, but in essence, you are. And then I think your skin, while being a decent barrier, is not perfect. So things you're putting on your skin, if there's endocrine disruptors on there, that's something that one would want to avoid. Any sort of harsh chemicals. People also forget that your skin actually has sort of a bacteria makeup that's important. And when you're using really harsh sort of soaps, detergents on your skin, like, you are disrupting some of that as well. So I think, you can certainly go to extremes, but for me, kind of at the time, the endocrine disruptors were really the big one.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And so when you talk about, the oral care, that is like food. I mean, it's something you're putting in your mouth and you are ingesting it in some way. But let's get into that. So you found this ingredient. You're doing some research in Japan. So how did that come about? How did you know that was the ingredient?
Yeah, so I sort of, as I mentioned, the two requirements that we had in starting the company, and John and I have always been tinkering with ideas for a company. And meanwhile, sort of, I didn't mention this, but both of us sort of out of college, we do our 2 years in investment banking, and then afterwards he went to a hedge fund and I went to a different hedge fund. So we've been sort of investors for a long time at this point. And part of that, I think, which was a really good sort of crossover skill to starting a company, is that our jobs every day were to look at companies across industries, across geographies, across asset classes, and we were speaking to great management teams, mediocre management teams, how people run their businesses well, and how you don't run businesses well. And so we had always sort of behind the scenes, always been playing with different business ideas. And at this moment, when we really had a problem to solve, and that being sort of the key part, there was an issue. We wanted to use cleaner toothpaste that actually worked, something that my brother would be okay with, that literally did not exist in the market in the US. And so our requirements, number one, where it had to be safe enough as food. And honestly, most of the natural toothpaste, even today, that are on the market, you should not be eating. I mean, it's a crazy thing that like they're called natural toothpaste, but when you search the ingredients, you realize like, I wouldn't want to be eating this on a plate every single day. Like, this is not safe enough as food. Number two, the requirement was that it had to have effective replacements in it that also protected your teeth, because if dentists were recommending it, they couldn't recommend something and have their patients' teeth fall out as a result of using it. And that was something that also didn't exist on the market in the US. There was not a natural toothpaste dentist could recommend. So we knew we could solve the first piece, which was making the ingredients really clean. That was definitely solvable with a good chemist. Number two, we didn't have immediately sort of a alternative to fluoride. And fluoride, there's a lot of controversy, but what I'll say is it does work. It essentially hardens the enamel that you have. It doesn't add additional enamel to it, but it takes what you have and makes it very tough and hard. Which is a good thing because it helps to prevent against cavities. It's not perfect. It's, call it 30% effective against preventing cavities, which is better than zero. But in large doses, and if you're consuming it in water, which where I live in New York City, it's in our water supply. If you drink lots of water and then you're also using it in your toothpaste and getting fluoride treatments, you're likely consuming too much fluoride. If you have white spots on your teeth, that's fluorosis. And that means that you've had either your mother when she was pregnant or when you were a child, you were consuming too much fluoride. And obviously sort of there's worse effects of fluoride that are not just aesthetic. The studies have shown that in populations that use fluoride in their water, there's actually lower IQs than populations that don't use fluoride. So we try to stay very objective and where the science is. We're not anti-fluoride by any means, but if there's an alternative that works just as well, that's really safe, then we might as well use that, particularly for sensitive people like I was at the time, going through IVF, potentially becoming pregnant. So to me, it was something that I did want to avoid. So we find hydroxyapatite in Japan on a work trip. We were over there meeting with companies, and everywhere we went at this point, we were going into pharmacies, looking at sort of what other places were doing with their toothpaste. And obviously everything on the tube is Japanese, and we're Googling sort of what all of
What
these
does this
things
mean?
mean. Exactly, because we would not be able to just intuit that on our own. And we keep seeing hydroxyapatite pop up. And hydroxyapatite is actually, I mean, while seemingly or it sounds unnatural, it's 97% of what makes up your teeth enamel. It's 70% of what makes up your bones. It's completely abundant in your body. You could have a whole big pile of it, consume it, and have no safety issues. And the neat story of hydroxyapatite is that it was invented by NASA in the 70s because astronauts were coming back, their enamel was weakening, and they were trying to figure out a way to help rebuild their enamel with what they already had. And so it's essentially a crystal, and so it binds to the existing crystals that already make up your teeth. And so they figured out how to chemically manufacture it. And then the Japanese right away, of course, it was the Japanese, they say, let's put this in our toothpaste. And so they've actually been using it since the 70s, and it's about 60% of the market in Japan. And we have 50 plus years of data showing that it's very safe, but also very effective. comparatively to fluoride as well, which was really important. So that was sort of the moment where we said we can actually solve these two pieces and create a toothpaste that is both very safe but also super effective.
Mhm. So why would other toothpaste manufacturers not put something that's safe? Is it cost? Is that one of the reasons that we continue to use fluoride? Because even where I'm at in the Toronto area, I mean, fluoride is in the water for sure. And as a kid growing up in the US, I mean, same thing, that most places do have fluoride in the water.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've gotten this one a number of times, because it is sort of the logical question to ask. You're like, if this is so wonderful and magical, why aren't we all using this? And look, I don't want to be too negative, but the truth is that um, fluoride is very inexpensive, if not given away practically for free. There's very little evidence to suggest that fluoride consumed in water actually does anything, which is sort of the sad part of it. It really the evidence shows that it has to be topically applied. The issue is that one has to be careful because it is toxic, especially sort of with younger kids, and you want to make sure people aren't consuming too much of it, which is why you have to spit it out or rinse sort of after brushing your teeth. But really the benefits are when it's done topically. So for instance, I think with some conventional toothpaste brands, they might be spending, let's say, 25 cents to manufacture their whole tube, all the ingredients, the box, everything that goes into their toothpaste. That would probably be less than just the cost of hydroxyapatite. So I think it would really change the margin profile for certain companies to use this. Our hope, if we're successful over time, is that everybody has access and is able to use hydroxyapatite instead of fluoride. I think that there are so many benefits. Like I said, the benefits for both are applied topically. If you can actually apply lots of it and leave it on overnight and not have to rinse it, it's a game changer. It's both a game changer for kids who can't spit. Like I have a 1.5-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they're just consuming everything and putting in their mouth. I don't have to worry about it with them. I can leave it overnight. But also for adults too. Like if you have teeth that are on their way to becoming cavities and sort of they're small enough lesions, you can actually put a glob of it on the tooth and leave it overnight and not have any issues. You can't do that with fluoride. So I do think that there are actually a lot of advantages to fluoride or to hydroxyapatite over fluoride. That is why we hope sort of the industry transitions over time. But certainly cost is a big piece of it, especially when there are some examples where for instance, it's a fertilizer byproduct. They have to properly dispose of the fluoride that comes out in that process. They want to just give it away to safely dispose of it, which is part of why it is much more inexpensive than hydroxyapatite.
Right. But I mean, so I'm just going to say this for our audience's benefit, like cheaper to, produce with fluoride, a little more expensive using the hydroxyapatite. But in the long run, if you're spending a lot more money on dental care for cavities or if your teeth are falling out or, white spots. And so you're trying to get your teeth bleached, but not even counting all the other health benefits of things that you're putting into your body. Like it's a balancing act, right?
Yes.
And how you look at cost. And your health is worth it because without your health, you have nothing, right?
Right.
So, and
Yeah.
this is so interesting how your IVF process has led you to innovate. So I love that because, you're a woman who has founded this amazing company. I have tried your products. I really, really love the toothpaste. I think, well, I love it all. It's all fantastic. But maybe talk to our audience a little bit about where can they find it? And I think you've given good feedback on why it's important to use it, but where can they find your product?
So most of our sales are done through our website at risewell.com. We also have a lot of great partnerships with almost 1,000 dental offices, which is really incredible. So that's sort of another channel. And then we also have retailers as well, where people can find us. So there's a few different choices that people have. And over time, I mean, the hope is that we can be in more places. But we've got a fairly lean team, so that's something that it's working on every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's good for our audience to know. They can find it on your website. So order direct, which is great. And I think the big message, what I've heard here today, Kori, is we need to pay more attention to what labels are saying. Right? What are we taking into our bodies? And then what are the consequences of that in a lot of situations? When we were talking about the IVF earlier, like when I relocated to Canada, I mean, I never really even heard that much about women having to go through IVF. And it's very, very normal in the, let's say, the greater Toronto area. Lots of women have been experiencing that, which is so sad, and it's hard. It's very hard on your body, as you talked about earlier, and not to mention the expense. And so, really, looking at alternatives and ways to holistically, have a healthier body. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one thing to your point about the looking at labels that's really important is that it's not just I think a lot of times like the simple thing is like to use fluoride or to not, but like it's not even so much, that side of the argument, because as I've noted, sort of there can be benefits to fluoride. If one is choosing sort of nothing, it is good to use something that's helping to protect your enamel. But there's a whole host of other ingredients in toothpaste that one wants to avoid, or even in other oral care products, like with mouthwash, the alcohol in mouthwash. People don't realize that the alcohol, while it does kill bad bacteria, it also kills all of your good bacteria. And so if you're trying to build up a good microbiome, your mouth is connected all the way to your stomach. Like they're not sort of isolated areas where if you wipe out all of the good bacteria in your mouth, you're somehow going to foster a good gut microbiome at the same time. And so there's a really delicate balance in your oral microbiome that's important for fostering sort of the microbiome of your whole body. And it's important that one is careful with all of the other ingredients too, whether it be the foaming agents that are overly harsh and unnecessary. And I think that's one of the big, the first thing that usually people notice when switching to our toothpaste is that they don't have the rabid dog foaming that you normally have with conventional toothpaste, which that's a good thing. I always say to people that like if your toothpaste is foaming, it has a foaming agent, even if it's not called SLS. And that's like really critical because you don't want to be using detergents with your gums in your mouth. Like it's too harsh. And then other things too, like natural flavors that aren't natural, and things like triclosan, which was banned in hand soap. And so there's like this whole list of things where they're not even super necessary in your oral care products, and people don't realize sort of the harmful effects, especially long term, of using them twice a day. And your gums being like sponges, where that's why they have sublingual medication, is because it's a great way to sort of get into your system quickly, even if you're spitting out toothpaste. And then lastly, I mean, with floss, most conventional floss is coated with Teflon.
Yes.
And Teflon we took out of pans a long time ago, but because of at least US regulations, and I'm not sure of how it is in Canada, companies are not required to disclose ingredients in certain products like floss. So if you're buying floss in the store, you literally do not know that there's Teflon in it because they're not required to tell you that. And so we're different. We of course disclose all of our ingredients in our products, but yeah, it's sort of these little things that it does take. You actually have to do some research and understand what is it in the products that I'm using all the time, especially ones that are going into my body.
Yeah. Well, and I was sharing this with you, and I do want to share it with our audience because when I tried just before I tried your product, I had been using a toothpaste that I've used for years, like and like years, and it has baking soda in it. So you think you're using something good, but all of a sudden my daughter and I both had reactions. Like she was worse than me, where her mouth, like she couldn't eat for like 2 days because it was almost like it blistered the inside of her mouth. And your toothpaste came, and so I was using that, and the biggest thing I saw, to your point about there was no foaming, but it was so clean. Like like even as you're using it, you feel like you have to use more in the beginning because you're so used to that foaming. But it was so clean in my mouth, and same with the mouthwash, right? You didn't have the alcohol taste, and everything was just clean. But you know what I would say to our audience is try a tube, right? Like just try a tube and see what you think, because it is everything you're describing I experienced, and especially when I made that switch. And I actually went through a number of different ones to try to find one that felt right. So I appreciate, you know, what you've done here in creating something that is natural and not just saying natural, but actually is natural and healthy for you. And I think, you know, I am going to harp on this a little bit, but the ingredients piece is very important. And I don't care what it is. If it's food, I saw something the other day where somebody had a funny, it was an Instagram post, and it was meant to be funny, but it was saying, okay, you let your kids eat tongues, feet, right, from different animal products, but you won't let them eat a bruised banana. Like, come on, what's wrong with us? And we have to start thinking about like what foods we are putting in. And that deals with a lot of the issues, whether it's celiac, autoimmune, like there's so many things, inflammatory, so many things that, you know, food gives you signals as to what's right for your own body.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the hormone signals too, being this sort of delicate balance that's going on that we're not aware of like we are with sort of some other processes. And frankly, I mean, your microbiome for that matter too, like it's something that's gaining a lot of attention more recently. But people haven't understood sort of how, you know, if you're using products, whether it be toothpaste or mouthwash or things that are killing lots of the good bacteria, and that's actually one interesting sort of tidbit I didn't share before, but the other sort of big active ingredient in our products is xylitol, which it's a sugar alcohol, so it doesn't sort of act like sugar in your body, but it's really interesting because it essentially tricks the bad bacteria in your mouth into thinking it's sugar, and they go to eat it and they can't digest it, and they actually, so it targets just the bad bacteria without killing the good bacteria.
Okay.
Also helps with saliva production. It's a prebiotic. And so there's all these sort of great benefits to it that people don't realize. So in addition to the hydroxyapatite, we have something else too that is really thinking about your mouth as the gateway to health for the rest of your body, which it's a shift that I don't think is widely understood, particularly since I think part of it is I always sort of talk about this with my brother, the dentist, that your dentistry was separated from the rest of medicine. And so it's almost as if people think of their mouth as this independent place on their body that somehow doesn't sort of interact with the rest of their body. But the truth is it doesn't. It's all connected. And so if one can foster, to your point, like spend a little extra, whether it be to the equivalent of 2 coffees per month on a high quality toothpaste and oral care products, it's contributing to sort of all the other decision one makes in living sort of a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's, you know, part of the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast today was just creating that awareness, even so that people start paying more attention to, you know, what we put in. There can be consequences, right? And it can show up in lots of different ways, whether it's through celiac, whether it's having to go through IVF, whether it's autoimmune, whatever. But if we're not paying attention, then it can create bigger problems. And even when you're talking about the microbiome, like so many people don't even know what that is, right? And that balancing of and making sure your body has good bacteria is important, because we've been taught that bacteria is bad, but there's good and bad, and so it's making sure that we're balancing both of those. So
Totally.
sorry, I'm just cognizant of our time here. So what's next for Risewell?
Yeah, so we're going to sort of stick to our knittings in oral care, but there's lots to do here. I mean, I think that we're just starting to scratch the surface on sort of the health of the microbiome, and that's something that we're doing a lot of research on. I think the thing that's really unique about our company is that we're very much driven by science. I think that there's a lot of natural brands out there, and I think if you're sort of not in the oral care space, it's easy to not have to be driven by science, because there's not like that, the importance of the health and recommendation from dentists and that piece of it that's really important to us. So, we can spend many years sort of researching new products and, different things that we have in our pipeline. So that's something that's in process. We also have, in addition to our toothpaste, we have our mouthwash, which has lots of the good xylitol that we were talking about before. Our floss is coated with hydroxyapatite, which is really helpful because it helps to get it in the cracks of your teeth, which is actually where most cavities start.
Yeah.
We have kids products as well, which we didn't sort of even touch on all the benefits for kids of using hydroxyapatite versus fluoride, but they're abundant, especially with developing brains. It's just such a no-brainer, no pun intended, for kids to be using this, and also just avoiding the stress for parents of whether or not their kids are consuming too much fluoride certainly is a benefit for me. And then we've got sort of our mints as well, which are also like really neat because if it's sort of a dentist's greatest fantasy to have, if they could have had fluoride in mints that people were sort of consuming all the time. But we can't do that for obvious safety reasons. But hydroxyapatite and xylitol are completely safe. And so the mints are actually, they can be even used as travel toothpaste if one wants to put it in your mouth and you can
Oh,
actually brush with it.
fantastic.
Yeah, so there's sort of these like great, we don't talk enough about our mints, but they're like this really cool under the radar multi-purpose product that we have. I've used them for toothpaste before, but also it's great after lunch to, you can bite on a mint and there's all these benefits to your mouth and microbiome and orally as well. So those are some of the products that we're really excited about, and then have new products on the horizon as well, which will be exciting. And then hopefully just getting out to the hands of more people through kind of different channels. And Canada is something that we're working on, kind of markets outside of the US. It's challenging as each sort of country has their own regulations, but we do sell through some distributors to Canada. So Canadians can get our products as well.
Yay! Well, I was actually going to ask that because not just for Canada, but our listeners come from 48 different countries. And so is there availability to get it outside of North America, let's say?
Yeah, so Canada, we're definitely available. The UK, I believe we're available. I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, but it's in process. It's something we've been trying to do in an efficient way. But it's hard when you've got sort of this big market in the US where like there's still, I mean, during COVID, we had years where like we were still so behind and just keeping up with demand that we'll definitely get there. And you can actually now find us on Amazon as well, which is sort of a new thing. So that's exciting as well. So I'm not actually sure how that works with other countries. That might alleviate some of that issue, but I don't want to misspeak on that. So, but people can always message us on Instagram. It's Risewell CO is our account handle, and we can always let them know how they can find us in their given country.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Well, Kori, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for sharing, your journey, but also, enlightening us on the education of oral health. I think that's really important. And our audience, as you're listening to this today, follow on Instagram, reach out to Kori if you have questions, or check out your local Amazon site and see if you actually have access to Risewell. That's a great, usually I think a lot of countries you can get, not all products, but a lot of products. I know in Canada, we can't get US stuff. Yeah. But that's awesome. So Kori, thank you so much for being with us today. And we wish you, great success and continued, changing the world, because it takes individuals like yourself and your partners to, innovate and find that niche that's needed. And educating. I think that's a big one too. And so we appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Vicki. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I want to thank our audience. Thank you again for being here. And please do share this episode with your family and friends. And know that you should be paying attention to labels and what you're putting in your mouth for oral care. And Risewell can certainly, check out their website, see what's happening there. I'm sure you have educational resources on the website as well that can help people understand if they want to dig a little deeper as to what ingredients are appropriate. So thank you everybody for being here, and we wish you well, and we look forward to seeing you on the next We'll Talk podcast. And just before I wrap up, if you're interested in learning more about who's coming up on our podcast or who we've had on our podcast, sign up for our newsletter at wilempowered.com. That's one L. And that'll give you insight as to what conversations we're having from around the globe. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Take care.